Every time you hear a kernel pop, you are hearing a tiny explosion. Not a metaphor, an actual pressure vessel failing. The hull of a popcorn kernel is one of the most structurally dense biological membranes in the plant world, and when heat converts the moisture trapped inside it to steam, the pressure builds to roughly 135 pounds per square inch before the hull gives way in under a millisecond. That sound you associate with movies and butter and lazy evenings is the sound of a biological bomb going off 40 times a second. And the reason that specific type of corn ended up in your pantry, and in your movie theater, and in your microwave is one of the more improbable accident chains in food history, starting with a Peruvian farmer 5,000 years ago who was just trying to store grain, and ending with the Great Depression accidentally inventing one of the most profitable food products on Earth. Let's go through it. Corn, domesticated from a wild grass called teosinte in southern Mexico roughly 10,000 years ago, comes in dozens of varieties with radically different properties. Sweet corn is what you eat off the cob. Soft, high sugar, moist. Dent corn and flint corn are what feed livestock and get ground into flour. And popcorn is something else entirely, botanically distinct, with a combination of three properties that no other corn variety shares. Property 1. The hull. Popcorn has the densest, most moisture-impermeable hull of any corn variety. It traps moisture inside with almost no leakage. Property 2. The starch structure. Inside the kernel is a dense outer layer of hard starch surrounding a soft, wet core. Property 3. About 14% moisture content sealed inside that hull like water in a pressure cooker. Heat it, the moisture converts to steam, the steam can't escape, pressure builds to 135 pounds per square inch, and then the hull fails all at once. The soft interior starch expands to 40 times its original volume in a millisecond. That's the pop. The white puff shape you eat is the interior starch turned inside out by the pressure release. Sweet corn can't do this. The hull is too soft, steam leaks out before pressure can build. Dent corn can't do it. Wrong starch ratio, too much hard starch relative to soft. Only popcorn has the specific combination. And here's the part that matters for this story. Nobody designed this combination. Farmers in ancient Mesoamerica were selecting for hard, dry, impermeable kernels because hard, dry, impermeable kernels store better through a dry season without molding or rotting. Storage convenience and explosive capacity are the same genetic traits, expressed differently under different conditions. The pop was a side effect of wanting corn that lasted. The oldest popcorn in the archaeological record comes from the Huaca Prieta site on the Peruvian coast, dated to approximately 3,600 BCE. The kernels are identifiable as popcorn type by their hull structure. This corn had traveled from Mexico to Peru through trade networks, and Peruvian farmers were selecting for storage durability, not for anything that exploded. Bat Cave in New Mexico has popcorn specimens from around 2,700 BCE. The Tehuacan Valley in Mexico has evidence from similar periods. Every site tells the same story. People growing hard-kerneled corn for storage, discovering accidentally that this particular corn variety does something extraordinary near fire, and incorporating that behavior into their food culture. The discovery moment was almost certainly not a deliberate experiment. Dried kernels fell into or near fire. They popped. Someone nearby found the result edible. This is the same origin story as most food discoveries throughout history. Something happened by accident near heat. It didn't kill anyone, and it was pleasant enough to repeat on purpose. What followed across the next few thousand years was the same selection process that shaped every crop in this series. Farmers choosing the traits that made the crop most useful, with consequences nobody planned. Hundreds of distinct popcorn varieties developed across Mesoamerica and South America over these millennia, each adapted to specific growing conditions and culinary uses. Some varieties were selected for maximum popping volume, kernels that expand dramatically, producing the light, airy result that fills a large bag from a small amount of grain. Some were selected for whole tenderness after popping, so the eaten result didn't leave tough, chewy pieces caught in your teeth. Some were selected for flavor characteristics that varied with soil and altitude and growing conditions in ways that commercial production has entirely flattened. The commercial popcorn industry today is built on a genetic foundation that indigenous farmers in Mesoamerica and South America developed over 3,000 years of careful selection. This is almost never acknowledged. When Spanish colonizers arrived in the early 16th century, popcorn wasn't just food. Aztec women wore garlands of popped corn at ceremonies honoring the rain god Tlaloc. It appeared in ritual offerings presented at temples. Early Spanish accounts describe what is clearly popcorn being consumed and offered in context the Spanish writers often didn't fully understand, because they were watching rituals built around a food they had never encountered. The integration of popcorn into Aztec religious life tells you something important about the timeline. Foods only reach ceremonial significance after they have been part of everyday life long enough to become part of the meaning of everyday life. The Aztecs had been eating popcorn for centuries before the Spanish arrived. They had been eating it long enough that it had become sacred. Spain brought awareness of popcorn back to Europe, but not popcorn itself. The corn varieties that spread across Europe, Africa, and Asia in the 16th and 17th centuries were dent corn and flint corn, the varieties most immediately useful for grinding into flour and feeding livestock. These were the convenient choices for European farmers building new agricultural systems. High-yield, multi-use, familiar in their basic function even if unfamiliar in species. Popcorn, which required a specific kernel type that served a narrower set of purposes and was less immediately useful as a staple crop, was not the variety that colonization spread. Europe got corn. America kept the corn that explodes. This distinction would matter 3 centuries later in ways nobody anticipated. The shift that made popcorn commercial happened in 1885. Charles Cretors, a Chicago candy store owner, had a practical problem. How do you produce popcorn in quantity consistently in a public space? He modified a peanut roaster into a steam-powered corn popper that could be mounted on a cart and operated on the street. Not a scientific breakthrough. A mechanical solution to a business problem. What the steam popper produced, beyond consistent popcorn, was the smell, the specific airborne chemistry of popping corn that travels half a block and is almost impossible to ignore. Cretors wasn't selling popcorn. He was selling the experience of walking past a machine producing that smell. Street cart vendors spread through American cities, fairs, and public events through the 1880s and 1890s. 5 cents a bag. The raw kernels were cheap. The steam equipment was inexpensive to operate. The labor required was minimal. And the product was delivered immediately in a form that smelled extraordinary. Because the chemistry of popping corn produces aromatic volatile compounds that travel considerable distances through open air and bypass the rational evaluation process completely. You don't decide to want popcorn when you smell a popcorn cart. Your body decides before your brain is consulted. Cretors had accidentally built a marketing engine into the physics of his product. These are the properties of a successful street food. They are also, as it turned out, the exact properties that would make popcorn crucial in a context nobody involved had yet imagined. Movie theaters, when they emerged as a mass entertainment medium in the late 1890s and 1900s, specifically excluded food vendors. Theater owners were positioning themselves as respectable venues, the equivalent of legitimate theaters and opera houses, and food was associated with lower-class entertainment. Street vendors with popcorn carts would park outside theaters and sell to people going in. Inside the theater, no food. This distinction held for 30 years. Then the Depression hit. Movie theater revenue collapsed as disposable income disappeared across the country. Theater operators, desperate for any additional revenue stream, began allowing food vendors inside. Popcorn cost a nickel during an era when most luxury goods had become inaccessible. Movies were cheap enough that struggling families could still occasionally afford them. A 5-cent bag of popcorn was an affordable addition to an already affordable outing, a small luxury inside a difficult time. Theaters that allowed popcorn vendors reported higher total revenue. Theaters that had refused began changing their policies. By the late 1930s, Most large American movie theaters were selling popcorn. The Depression did what 30 years of natural opportunity hadn't. It put popcorn inside the building. World War II locked the connection permanently. Sugar rationing eliminated most candy alternatives, chocolate, hard candy, all the confectionery competition. Popcorn required no sugar. It was domestically grown, easy to produce, consistent with wartime conservation messaging. American popcorn consumption roughly tripled during the war years. The candy was gone. The popcorn was there. The habit formed and didn't break when the war ended. Television arrived in the late 1940s and nearly killed movie theaters. Attendance dropped significantly as audiences stayed home. What it accidentally did for popcorn was cement the concession model permanently. Theaters competing with free home entertainment needed to differentiate the experience and generate revenue from the people who still came. Studios take the majority of ticket revenue under standard distribution agreements. Concessions, popcorn, drinks, candy are where theater profit actually lives. The financial architecture of the modern movie theater, in which a $10 bag of popcorn is not a ripoff, but the entire business model, was set in place by television's threat to cinema. You are paying for the popcorn because television forced theaters to make you pay for the popcorn. Nobody planned any of this. Not one step. The Peruvian farmer selecting for storage durability had no idea they were starting a chain that would end with Depression-era theater operators and wartime sugar rationing and television economics. Charles Cretors was solving a production problem in his candy store in Chicago. He was not thinking about the movie industry, which barely existed yet. The Depression-era theater operator, letting the popcorn vendor inside, was making a survival decision for that specific week, not building a cultural institution. The Wartime Rationing Board was managing sugar supplies for military and medical needs, not deliberately clearing the field for popcorn. Television executives were launching a new medium, completely unaware that they were about to restructure the economics of movie theater concessions. Every link in the chain was an accident that created the conditions for the next accident, and the whole chain looks like a plan only in retrospect. The kernel at the center of all of it is exactly what it was 5,000 years ago, a small, hard, impermeable thing shaped by selection pressure to survive a dry Andean storage context without molding or rotting. The pop was always there, latent in the hull density and the starch ratio and the trapped moisture, waiting for heat. It took 5,000 years of accumulated accidents, agricultural selection that was never about popping, a Spanish colonization that spread the wrong corn varieties across Europe, a Chicago candy store owner solving a production problem, an economic depression breaking down a social barrier, a world war eliminating the competition, a television medium restructuring the economics of going to the movies. To put that kernel in a red and white striped bag in a dark room where someone is about. To watch something explode on screen while eating something that already did 40 times a second, all the way down to the bottom of the bag. The next time you're sitting in a dark room, hearing those sounds coming from your own bag, you know what you're hearing now. 5,000 years of accident. Share this with someone who doesn't. And subscribe. Every week, the real history underneath the ordinary things you assumed were always just there. See you there.